I destroyed my marriage because of a secret I kept for 20 years. I don't know if there's any way back. I never thought I would be writing something like this. I'm 52 years old. I've been married for 27 years. Until a few months ago, if you had asked me what my greatest accomplishment was, I would have told you without hesitation that it was my family. Not my career, not the house, not the financial stability. My family. I have a wife who spent nearly 3 decades loving me more faithfully than I ever deserved. We have 2 children who are now adults and building lives of their own. We have a home filled with photographs, souvenirs from vacations, drawings our kids made when they were little, birthday cards, anniversary gifts, and thousands of memories accumulated over years of ordinary life. For most of my adult life, I believed I was one of the lucky ones. My wife and I survived things that destroy marriages, money problems, the death of parents, job losses, health scares, the exhausting years of raising children, the empty nest years that followed. Every challenge seemed to strengthen us instead of breaking us. People used to joke that we were disgustingly in love. Maybe we were. I certainly was. Even now, after everything that has happened, I still love her. That is part of what makes this so unbearable. My wife is one of those genuinely kind people who seem increasingly rare. She remembers birthdays. She volunteers when people need help. She notices when someone is hurting before they say a word. When our children were growing up, she somehow managed to make every holiday feel magical, even when money was tight. When I struggled professionally, she encouraged me. When I doubted myself, she believed in me. When I failed, she stayed. She trusted me completely. That sentence feels like a knife now, because for 20 years she trusted a version of me that wasn't real, or at least wasn't complete. Looking back, I can see how absolute that trust was. She never checked my phone, never questioned where I was, never demanded proof, never suspected anything. Why would she? I gave her no reason to. For 2 decades I was the husband she believed I was. Present, loving, reliable. I coached little league games, attended dance recitals, sat through parent-teacher conferences, held her hand in hospital waiting rooms, brought her coffee every morning, remembered anniversaries, learned exactly how she liked her eggs, built a life with her piece by piece. A real life. That's what makes this so complicated. The marriage wasn't fake. The love wasn't fake. The family wasn't fake. Everything good that happened was real. At least I thought it was. Until recently, I believed our story was simple. A young couple falls in love, makes mistakes, grows older together, builds a family, lives happily enough. I thought we'd reached the stage of life where the hardest parts were behind us. Our children were grown. Our mortgage was nearly paid off. We spent weekends planning trips we wanted to take after retirement. Sometimes we'd sit on the back porch after dinner and talk about what our lives might look like in 10 years. I remember one evening in particular. The sun was setting. She rested her head on my shoulder. She smiled and said, "We've had a good life, haven't we?" I kissed the top of her head and told her yes, because I believed it. I believed the past was settled. I believed old mistakes were buried. I believed some secrets could stay buried forever. I was wrong, and the thing that destroys me now is knowing that my wife spent 20 years loving me with complete honesty while I spent those same 20 years protecting a lie. A lie that began with a single night, a single decision, a decision I made almost 20 years ago that I thought would die with me. Instead, it waited, patiently, silently, for 2 decades, and when it finally came back, it didn't just expose what I had done. It destroyed everything we had built on top of it. Because 20 years ago, during a work conference in another city, I made the worst decision of my life, and I have been paying for it ever since, even if I didn't realize the bill hadn't come due yet. I need to be very clear about something before I continue. Nothing I'm about to say is an excuse. I was not trapped. I was not manipulated. I was not forced. Nobody tricked me. I made a choice. A selfish, cowardly choice. The reason I keep repeating that is because I've spent the last few months listening to my own mind search desperately for explanations that somehow make me less responsible. There aren't any. I was responsible then. I'm responsible now. 20 years ago, I was 32. My wife and I had been married for 7 years. Our oldest child was still little. Money was tight. Life was busy. I was working long hours trying to establish myself professionally. From the outside, everything looked fine. Inside, I was struggling with things I never properly addressed. Insecurity. The constant feeling that I wasn't successful enough, wasn't attractive enough, wasn't important enough. I compare that younger version of myself to who I became later, and sometimes he feels like a stranger. But he was still me. That's what matters. The company I worked for sent me to a professional conference in another state. It was supposed to be 3 days, networking events, presentations, meetings, The kind of thing that sounds much more exciting than it actually is. I remember my wife helping me pack. I remember kissing her goodbye. I remember our son wrapping his arms around my leg and asking me to bring him something from the airport gift shop. Normal memories. Completely ordinary. That's one of the things that haunts me now. There was nothing wrong with my marriage when I left. Nothing. No huge fight. No separation. No crisis. I wasn't looking for an affair. I wasn't planning to cheat. The opportunity simply appeared, and instead of walking away, I stepped toward it. There was a woman at the conference. A coworker from a different regional office. I won't use her name. She doesn't matter anymore. Not because she was evil. Not because she seduced me. Because she wasn't the person who broke my marriage. I was. We talked during breaks. Had drinks with a larger group one evening. Talked more afterward. Nothing dramatic. Nothing cinematic. No grand romance. No secret passion. Just two adults making increasingly poor decisions. I remember the exact moment I could have stopped everything. There were actually dozens of moments. Walking to the elevator, standing outside a hotel room. Every step offered another chance to leave, another chance to remember my wife, another chance to think about my family, another chance to be the man I should have been. I ignored every one of them. That is the truth. The next morning was worse than I can describe. Not because I had been caught. Not because there were consequences, because I suddenly saw myself clearly. I remember staring at my reflection in the hotel bathroom mirror. I remember feeling physically sick, not guilty in the abstract, not vaguely ashamed. I felt contaminated, like I had taken something clean and destroyed it. I called my wife that morning. I told her I loved her. She told me she loved me too. She asked how the conference was going. I lied. That phone call still lives in my head. 20 years later, I can still hear her voice. Warm, trusting, happy to hear from me. And I knew exactly what I had done only hours earlier. The conference ended. I went home. I hugged my wife. I hugged my son. I carried my suitcase inside. And nobody knew. That was the moment everything could have gone differently. I could have told her. I could have confessed. I could have accepted whatever consequences followed. Instead, I chose silence. At first I told myself I needed time. A day. Maybe a month. Then I convinced myself telling her would only hurt her. Then I convinced myself it would destroy our family. Then I convinced myself I could make up for it by becoming a better husband. The lie didn't begin with one dramatic decision. It grew one day at a time. One rationalization at a time. One act of cowardice at a time. And before long, I wasn't just hiding a mistake. I was protecting a version of reality that never actually existed. Because every day I stayed silent, I was taking something from my wife. Something she didn't even realize was being stolen. Her right to know. Her right to choose. Her right to decide whether the marriage continued. At the time, I couldn't see that. Or maybe I refused to. What I did see was my family. And I became determined to spend the rest of my life proving that night meant nothing. I just didn't understand yet that some debts don't disappear because you stop looking at them. Sometimes they wait, growing larger in the dark. And by the time they finally come due, the cost is far greater than you ever imagined. For a long time, I convinced myself that guilt was the same thing as accountability. It isn't. I understand that now. Back then, however, the distinction felt meaningless. I hated what I had done. I thought about it constantly. The memory followed me everywhere. Every family dinner, every birthday party, every anniversary, every time my wife looked at me with complete trust. I carried that night around like a stone in my chest. For the first few months after it happened, I was certain I would confess. I would lie awake beside my wife and rehearse the conversation in my head. I imagined her crying. I imagined her leaving. I imagined destroying our family. Then morning would come, and I would tell myself, not today. Tomorrow became next week. Next week became next month. Eventually, silence became routine. Not comfortable, never comfortable, just familiar. And while I remained silent, something unexpected happened. I started becoming the husband I should have been all along. Not because I deserved praise, not because I was noble, because I was terrified of the person I had seen in that hotel mirror. I never wanted to be him again. I threw myself into my marriage. I became more attentive, more patient, more present. When my wife talked, I listened. When she needed help, I helped. When she was exhausted, I stepped in. I became the father who volunteered for school events, the husband who remembered small details, the man who showed up. People noticed. Friends would sometimes comment on how devoted I seemed. Family members would joke that my wife had trained me well. My wife would smile and laugh. And every time it happened, I felt two completely opposite emotions. Pride and shame. Pride because I genuinely loved my family. Shame because nobody knew why I was trying so hard. Years passed, then more years. Our children grew. Life became busy in all the normal ways. Soccer games became graduations. School projects became college applications. The chaos of raising kids slowly transformed into the quieter rhythm of middle age. And through all of it, my wife remained exactly who she had always been. Loyal, patient, trusting. She never suspected anything. Not once. At least not that she ever told me. There were moments when I almost confessed. Every anniversary felt like an opportunity. Every major milestone felt like a chance to finally tell the truth. Our 10th anniversary, then our 15th, then our 20th. Each time I came close, fear stopped me. The longer I waited, the harder it became. What began as a secret 1-year-old became a secret 10 years old, then 15, then 20. And somewhere along the way, I started telling myself a story. A dangerous story. I told myself that the man who cheated wasn't really me anymore. That he belonged to another chapter of my life. Another version of myself. A younger, weaker, more selfish version. I looked at my marriage and saw evidence that people could change. I looked at my relationship with my wife and saw proof that I had become better. I wasn't pretending. I genuinely believed it. I loved her more at 50 than I had at 30. I respected her more, appreciated her more, needed her more. There were nights when we'd sit together on a couch after everyone else had gone to bed. Nothing special, just watching television or talking. She would rest her feet in my lap. Sometimes she'd fall asleep against my shoulder, and I would look at her and think, thank God I didn't lose this. I see now how selfish that thought was, because hidden inside it was another truth. Thank God she never got the chance to decide. At the time, I didn't phrase it that way. I thought I was protecting her, protecting the kids, protecting our marriage. The reality was uglier. I was protecting myself. The years kept moving. 20 years is a strange amount of time. It's long enough for an entire life to form around a secret. Long enough for children to become adults. Long enough for gray hair to appear. Long enough for old mistakes to feel almost fictional. Eventually, I stopped imagining discovery. Not because I forgot, because I believe it was impossible. The woman from the conference disappeared from my life immediately afterward. No messages, no meetings, no friendship, nothing. The event became a sealed chapter, or so I thought. And because life felt stable, because our marriage felt stronger than ever, because the secret had survived for 2 decades, I made a terrible assumption. I assumed I had gotten away with it. Not morally. I still hated myself for it. But practically, I believed the truth would die with me. I believed that one reckless night had become buried beneath 20 years of love, sacrifice, and shared history. I believed the past had finally stayed in the past. Then one ordinary Tuesday afternoon, a forgotten piece of that past reached into the present, and within a matter of days, the life I had spent 20 years building began to collapse. If someone had asked me 6 months ago how my marriage would end, I never would have imagined this. I might have said illness, old age, some tragedy beyond our control. I certainly would not have said an email account. Something so small, something so stupid, something that had sat dormant for nearly 2 decades. Yet that's exactly where everything began. A few months ago, I was cleaning up old digital accounts. Retirement planning had made me realize how much forgotten information I'd accumulated over the years. Old passwords, ancient subscriptions, email addresses I hadn't touched since my 30s. One of those accounts was an email address I had used during the period when the conference happened. I honestly hadn't logged into it for years, maybe over a decade. Most of the messages were junk mail, expired promotions. Tabam! Nothing important. Then I saw a notification. A message from someone I didn't recognize. The subject line was simple. Not sure if you remember me. The sender was the woman from the conference. My stomach dropped immediately. Even now, writing this, I can feel that exact sensation. That cold rush of panic. The message itself wasn't romantic. It wasn't threatening. It wasn't blackmail. In some ways, that made it worse. She explained that she had recently been sorting through old files and photographs while helping an elderly parent move into assisted living. She had come across pictures from conferences and company events from years ago. Seeing them had reminded her of people she'd lost touch with. She said she hoped life had treated me well. That was it. A few paragraphs. Nothing more, nothing less. 20 years of silence interrupted by a casual greeting. I should have deleted it immediately. Instead, I stared at it. Not because I missed her. I didn't. Not because I wanted contact. I didn't. I stared because the past suddenly felt alive again. For years, that night had existed only inside my head. Now, there was proof, evidence, a living connection to something I had spent decades pretending was buried. I didn't respond. I never intended to. I closed the email. I told myself it was over. But something had changed. For the first time in years, I felt genuinely afraid. The next few days were uncomfortable. I became distracted. My wife noticed. Of course she did. She always noticed when something was wrong. Everything okay? She asked one evening. I remember forcing a smile. Tired from work. Another lie. A small one compared to the others, but still a lie. The problem with secrets is that they make you paranoid. I started wondering whether I should tell her, not because I had suddenly become brave, because I was scared. What if more messages arrived? What if someone else contacted me? What if the past refused to stay buried this time? For several nights, I barely slept. I found myself replaying events from 20 years ago, memories I hadn't examined in years. The hotel, the conference, the choices, the silence that followed. My wife slept beside me while I stared at the ceiling, completely unaware that the foundation of her life was already beginning to crack. Then the second message arrived. This one changed everything. The woman wrote again. She apologized if her first email had been awkward. Then she attached several old photographs from conference events. Group photos, networking dinners, award ceremonies, harmless pictures. Most people would have looked at them and thought nothing of it. But there was one photograph, just one, a photo taken late at night. A small group gathered around a hotel bar. I was in it. She was standing beside me, her arm around my shoulder, both of us smiling. It wasn't explicit, it wasn't proof of an affair by itself, but it was enough to trigger something I hadn't felt in years. Panic, real panic. I downloaded the photos. Then I made the worst decision I had made since the affair itself. I didn't tell my wife. Instead, I tried to hide the problem. Because apparently I had learned nothing. I deleted the emails from the account. I deleted the downloaded files. I emptied the trash folder. I convinced myself the danger had passed. I convinced myself that if I acted quickly enough, I could erase the evidence. The irony is almost unbearable now. 20 years earlier, I had chosen secrecy. Now, faced with another opportunity to tell the truth, I chose secrecy again. And this time, fate wasn't willing to cooperate. Because the photographs weren't actually gone, the emails weren't actually gone, and within a matter of weeks, my wife would stumble across something I didn't even realize still existed. Something that would make her ask a question I had feared for 20 years. A question that would destroy both of our lives. Who is this woman? I have replayed that day thousands of times. Every detail, every word, every expression on her face. If I live another 30 years, I don't think I'll ever forget it. The discovery itself was almost absurdly ordinary. No dramatic investigation, no private detective, no elaborate scheme. Just bad luck and 20 years of lies finally reaching their expiration date. A few weeks after those emails arrived, my wife was helping me organize documents for a refinancing issue involving a small property I had inherited from my father. Part of the process required accessing old records and accounts. At some point, she needed a verification code sent to an old email address. The same email address, the one I hadn't used in years, the one that should never have mattered again. I wasn't even in the room when she logged in. I was outside taking a phone call. By the time I came back, everything had already changed. I remember seeing her sitting at the dining room table, my laptop open, her expression unreadable, not angry, not crying, just still, almost unnaturally still. At first I thought someone had died, a relative, a friend, some terrible news. Then she looked at me, and I knew. There are moments in life when your body understands reality before your mind catches up. My stomach dropped, my chest tightened. I knew. She didn't say anything immediately. She simply turned the laptop toward me. The email was open. The photographs were visible. The woman's name sat at the top of the screen. For a second, neither of us spoke. Then she asked the question, "Who is he?" I wish I could say I immediately confess. I wish I could say 20 years of cowardice ended right there. But the truth is uglier. My first instinct was still self-preservation. I muttered something vague. An old coworker, someone from a conference. Nothing important. The moment the words left my mouth, I saw something shift in her eyes. Not because she believed me, because she didn't. 27 years together had taught her when I was lying, and for the first time in our marriage, she was looking directly at a lie she could see. She asked again, "Who is she?" I sat down. My hands were shaking. I couldn't think, couldn't breathe properly, couldn't find an escape route, because there wasn't one. The truth had finally arrived, 20 years late. I don't remember exactly how I said it. I only remember the silence afterward. I told her about the conference. I told her about the night. I told her it happened once. I told her it ended immediately. I told her there was never anyone else. I told her I had been faithful ever since. I told her I loved her. I told her I was sorry. I told her everything, or at least everything I could. She listened without interrupting. That was somehow worse than yelling, worse than screaming, worse than throwing things. She just sat there, listening, while the life she thought she knew collapsed around her. When I finished, she looked down at the table. Then she asked a question I wasn't prepared for. Not did you love her? Not was she prettier than me? Not even how could you cheat? She asked, how long have you known? I didn't understand. What? How long have you known that I didn't know? The question hit me like a punch. Because she wasn't talking about the affair. She was talking about the lie. 20 years of breakfasts, holidays, vacations, birthdays, Christmas mornings, anniversaries. 20 years of watching her trust me while knowing something she didn't. I whispered the answer. 20 years. She closed her eyes, and for the first time, she cried. Not loudly, not dramatically, just tears running down her face while she sat completely motionless. I've seen my wife cry before, at funerals, at our children's graduations, during difficult moments in life. This was different. This looked like grief, real grief. The kind people experience when something irreplaceable dies. Eventually, she stood up, walked into our living room, and started staring at the family photographs on the wall. There were dozens. Vacations, birthdays, anniversaries, school events, our entire life. She looked at them for a very long time. Then she said something that still wakes me up at night. I don't know what any of these mean anymore. I tried to explain. God, I tried. I told her the marriage had been real. I told her the love had been real. I told her I had changed. I told her I had spent 20 years trying to become worthy of her. She turned toward me, and the expression on her face was something I had never seen before. Not hatred, not even anger, confusion, devastating confusion, as if she were looking at a stranger wearing her husband's face. Then she asked the question that would haunt every conversation that followed. A question I still cannot answer. If you could watch me trust you for 20 years and say nothing, did I ever really know who you were? I used to think trust was something solid, like a wall, a foundation, something that, once built over years, could survive almost anything. What I've learned is that trust is more like glass, strong enough to hold enormous weight, fragile enough to shatter from a single crack. And once it breaks, it never returns in the same form. The days after my confession were some of the longest of my life. Our house became strangely quiet, not hostile, not explosive, quiet, the kind of silence that makes every small sound feel unnaturally loud. Cabinets closing, footsteps in the hallway, the hum of the refrigerator. The absence of normal conversation was everywhere. My wife didn't leave immediately. In some ways, I almost wished she had. At least then I would have understood what was happening. Instead, she remained physically present while emotionally drifting somewhere I couldn't reach. She slept in the guest room. She ate meals at different times. She spent long stretches sitting alone, thinking, sometimes crying, sometimes simply staring into space. Every instinct I had told me to fix it, to explain, to apologize harder, to somehow convince her that the last 20 years mattered. But every attempt seemed to make things worse, because I kept focusing on the wrong thing. I kept talking about the affair. She kept talking about the lie. I was faithful after that. I must have said those words 100 times, maybe more. Every time, she looked at me with the same expression. Not disbelief, not skepticism, exhaustion. One night she finally answered, I know. That caught me off guard. You're the Ness. I stared at her. She continued, I believe you. For a brief moment, hope flickered. Then she kept talking, and destroyed it. I believe it happened once. I believe you regretted it. I believe you never did it again. I even believe you've been a good husband for most of our marriage. I remember feeling relief, then confusion, then dread, because tears had already started forming in her eyes, and I realized she wasn't defending me. She was explaining why this hurts so much. If you had spent 20 years being cruel, this would make more sense. I didn't know what to say. She looked down at her hands. You became better. Those 3 words nearly broke me, because she was right. I genuinely had. Not perfectly, not flawlessly, but honestly. The husband I became at 50 was not the man I was at 32. The problem was that change didn't erase history, and it definitely didn't erase deception. My wife started asking questions, hundreds of them, not all at once, sometimes days apart, sometimes in the middle of the night, sometimes while making coffee. Questions that seemed impossible to answer because they weren't really about facts. They were about reality itself. What else don't I know? Nothing. How can I believe that? I couldn't answer. Did you ever look at me and think about telling me? Yes? Then why didn't you? I couldn't answer that either, at least not honestly, because every truthful answer led back to fear. Fear of consequences, fear of losing her, fear of accountability. Every answer made me look exactly like what I was, a coward. One afternoon, I came home from work and found her sitting on the floor surrounded by old photo albums, dozens of them, the albums we had collected throughout our marriage. I remember feeling hopeful, stupidly hopeful. Maybe she was remembering the good years. Maybe she was reconnecting with our life together. Then I noticed she was crying, not quietly, not subtly, completely broken. I sat down nearby, careful not to get too close. She turned a page, a photograph from our 10th anniversary, another from a beach vacation, another from our daughter's birthday. Images of happiness, images I once loved. She stared at them as though they belonged to strangers. Finally, she spoke. I keep trying to figure out which version was real. I felt my throat tighten. What do you mean? The husband in these pictures. She touched one photograph gently. The man who loved me. Then she turned another page. The man who lied to me every day. She looked up. They can't both be real. The terrible thing is that they could. And that was exactly the problem. The loving husband was real. The liar was real. The father was real. The betrayer was real. All of them were me. My wife wanted a clear answer. A villain. A mask. A false identity. Something she could separate from the man she'd loved for decades. Instead, she discovered something far more painful. The man she loved and the man who betrayed her were the same person. And once that realization settled in, something inside our marriage began collapsing faster than either of us could stop. Because trust wasn't simply damaged, it was being rewritten, memory by memory, year by year, moment by moment. And soon the damage would spread beyond the two of us, because eventually our children were going to find out. And when they did, I would watch another version of my life fall apart. For the first few weeks after my wife learned the truth, we kept it between ourselves. Not because we were protecting the marriage. At that point, I wasn't even sure there was a marriage left to protect. We kept it private because neither of us knew how to explain something so complicated. How do you tell your children that their parents' 27-year marriage is collapsing because of a mistake that happened before one of them was even old enough to remember? How do you explain that a single night can reach forward through decades and destroy things that seemed permanent? The answer, as it turns out, is that you don't. There is no good way. There is only pain. Our children are adults now. Our son is 25. Our daughter is 23. Good people. Kind people. Far better than I deserve. For weeks, they sensed something was wrong. The tension was impossible to hide. Family group chats became awkward. Phone calls became shorter. My wife stopped sounding like herself. I stopped sounding like myself. Eventually, questions started coming. At first, we avoided them. Then one Sunday afternoon, our daughter showed up unexpectedly. She had been worried about her mother. She sat at our kitchen table and asked directly, "What's going on?" Nobody answered immediately. I remember looking at my wife. My wife looked at the floor, and suddenly I realized something. This secret had already stolen enough from her. I wasn't going to make her carry the burden of explaining it too. So I told our daughter myself, at least the simplified version, the truth, the affair, the lie, the 20 years. I watched confusion become shock. Shock become disbelief. Disbelief become devastation. She started crying almost immediately. Not because she hated me, because she loved both of us. Children, even adult children, never stop wanting their parents to be okay. And in that moment, she realized we weren't. A few days later, our son learned the truth too. His reaction was different. Less emotional at first, more stunned. Like someone trying to solve a puzzle that didn't fit together. He kept asking variations of the same question. 20 years? Every time he repeated it, it sounded less like a question and more like disbelief. 20 years? Yes. You never told Mom? No. 20 years? There was nothing else to say. The number itself had become its own indictment. Not 1 year, not 5, 20. The next family gathering was unbearable. It happened about a month later. A birthday dinner. One of those ordinary events that should have felt warm and familiar. Instead, it felt like a funeral where nobody knew what was supposed to be buried. Everyone was polite, careful, measured. The conversations were forced. The laughter sounded artificial. My wife and I sat at opposite ends of the table. I noticed our daughter watching us constantly, not suspiciously, sadly, as if she were witnessing the collapse of something she always assumed would last forever. At one point, someone brought out old photographs. An innocent gesture, something we'd done countless times before. The room went silent. Nobody said it. Nobody had to. Every picture now carried different weight. Every smiling image contained a secret only recently exposed. I watched my wife excuse herself from the table. A few minutes later, I found her standing alone outside, holding one of the photographs. It was from a family vacation nearly 15 years earlier, one of our happiest trips. I remembered every detail: the beach, the hotel, the endless photos we took. She stared at the image for a long time. Then she said something quietly, almost to herself. I used to love this picture. I didn't know how to respond. She continued. I look at it now and wonder what else I didn't know. That sentence crushed me because it perfectly captured what I had done. The affair wasn't invading our present. It was invading the past. Every memory had become suspect. Every happy moment carried an asterisk. Every anniversary raised questions. Every expression of love invited doubt. My wife wasn't just grieving the betrayal. She was grieving certainty. The certainty that her memories belonged entirely to her. The certainty that her marriage had been exactly what she believed. The certainty that she knew the man beside her. I had taken all of that away, and the damage wasn't limited to her anymore. It had spread through the entire family. Our children weren't choosing sides, at least not openly, but they were grieving too. Not the loss of a perfect marriage, the loss of the story they thought their family represented, the loss of trust in something they had always considered unshakable. For the first time in my life, I saw my actions not as a private failure but as a fracture running through generations. And while our family struggled to adapt to the truth, my wife was moving toward a realization that would ultimately destroy any hope I still had, because she was beginning to understand something that I had spent 20 years refusing to face. The affair wasn't the worst thing I had done. The lie was. About 2 months after everything came out, my wife said something that changed the way I understood my own actions. Until then, I had been fighting the wrong battle. I kept trying to prove that I wasn't the same man anymore. I kept pointing to the years after the affair, the birthdays, the anniversaries, the sacrifices, the consistency, the faithfulness, the life we built. I thought if I could somehow show her the totality of our marriage, she would see that one terrible decision didn't define all of it. What I didn't understand was that she already knew that. The problem was never that she believed I was secretly cheating for 20 years. The problem was that I had secretly decided for 20 years what she was allowed to know. We started attending counseling, not because she wanted reconciliation, not because I deserved it, because she wanted clarity, and because she needed a place where someone could help her untangle what had happened to her reality. The counselor asked difficult questions. Questions I hated. Questions that stripped away the comfortable stories I had been telling myself. One session stands out more than any other. The counselor asked why I hadn't confessed. I gave all the answers I had repeated in my head for years. I didn't want to hurt her. I didn't want to destroy the family. I regretted it immediately. I changed. I became a better husband. I loved her. The counselor listened patiently. Then she asked a simple question. Who benefited from the silence? The room went quiet. I already knew the answer. My wife knew the answer. Everyone knew. I benefited. I was the one who got to keep my marriage. I was the one who avoided consequences. I was the one who enjoyed 20 years of forgiveness that had never actually been requested. That realization hit differently when spoken out loud, because it exposed something ugly. For years I had framed my silence as protection. In reality, it was control. Not malicious control. Not calculated manipulation, but control nonetheless. I had made a decision on my wife's behalf. I had decided she didn't need the truth. I had decided the marriage should continue. I had decided she would remain in the relationship. I had decided all of it without her consent. One evening after counseling, my wife and I sat in the car outside our house. Neither of us moved. The engine was off. Rain tapped softly against the windshield. Eventually she spoke. I think I finally understand why this hurts so much. I looked at her. She stared forward. The affair isn't what broke me. Those words caught me off guard, not because I disagreed, because part of me had suspected it already. She continued, if you had told me 20 years ago, maybe I would have left. My chest tightened. Maybe. Or maybe I would have stayed. Another pause. Maybe I would have forgiven you. I couldn't breathe, because for the first time, she was talking about a future that had been stolen. A future neither of us would ever know. Then she looked at me. Tears filled her eyes. You took that choice from me. I don't think I'd ever experienced a sentence more painful than that one. Not because it was cruel, because it was true. Utterly true. For 20 years, I had focused on the guilt of cheating. I had never fully confronted the arrogance of deciding she didn't deserve to know. In trying to preserve our marriage, I had robbed her of agency. I had rewritten her life without permission, and there was no way to undo that. No apology could restore the lost choice. No act of devotion could return 20 years of informed consent. No amount of remorse could change history. After that conversation, something shifted in me. Not hope, the opposite. Acceptance. For the first time, I stopped trying to convince her to stay. I still told her I loved her. I still apologized. I still answered every question she asked. But I stopped arguing for reconciliation, because I finally understood that reconciliation wasn't something I could earn through effort. It was something only she could choose. And after 20 years of taking choices away from her, the least I could do was respect whatever choice she made now. Unfortunately, by then I could already see where her heart was heading. Not toward anger, not toward revenge, toward uncertainty. She wasn't saying she hated me. She wasn't saying she wanted to punish me. She was saying something far more devastating. She no longer knew who her husband was, and once that doubt took root, every attempt to save the marriage began slipping through my fingers. Because you can rebuild trust after many things. But how do you rebuild trust when the person you love no longer knows which version of you is real? The official separation happened 4 months after my wife discovered the truth. In some ways, it felt sudden. In other ways, it felt inevitable from the moment she opened that email. By then, we had spent months talking, crying, arguing, sitting in silence, answering impossible questions, trying to understand whether there was anything left to save. I wanted there to be. God, I wanted there to be. Not because I feared being alone, though I did. Not because I wanted to avoid consequences. That ship had sailed. I wanted there to be because I loved her. Because after 27 years, my life was intertwined with hers in ways that are difficult to explain. Every routine included her. Every plan included her. Every future I imagined included her. Yet love wasn't enough. Maybe it never was. One evening she asked if we could talk. The moment she said those words, I knew. There was a strange calmness about her. Not happiness. Not relief. Just a painful certainty. We sat at the kitchen table where so many conversations had happened over the years. Birthday planning, college discussions, vacation ideas, financial worries, dreams about retirement. Now we were discussing the end of our marriage. She held a mug of tea she barely touched. I remember noticing that her hands were trembling slightly. Mine were too. For a long time, neither of us spoke. Then she looked at me, and I saw something that terrified me. Compassion, not anger. Compassion. Because compassion meant she had already accepted something I was still fighting. I don't hate you, she said. I started crying immediately. I couldn't help it. Of all the things she could have said, those 4 words hurt the most. Because hatred would have been simpler. Hatred would have meant there was still certainty, still clarity, still a defined enemy. This was different. She wasn't looking at me like a villain. She was looking at me like a tragedy, a person she loved, a person who had broken something she could no longer repair. I know you've changed, she said. More tears. I know you've been a good husband in a lot of ways. More tears. I know you love me. Every sentence felt like both mercy and punishment. Because she wasn't denying the good years. She wasn't dismissing our life together. She was acknowledging all of it. Then came the part that finally shattered me. She looked down at the table before speaking again. I just don't know who you are anymore. I closed my eyes. Because that had become the central wound. Not the affair. Not even the lie itself. Identity. Trust. Reality. The man she thought she knew had disappeared. Or maybe he had never existed in the way she believed, and she couldn't reconcile those possibilities. I keep looking at our memories, she continued, and I don't know where to place them. I didn't understand. She tried to explain. When I think about our anniversaries, I wonder whether you were remembering what happened. When I think about family vacations, I wonder whether you felt guilty. When I think about every time I told someone how much I trusted you, her voice broke. And suddenly I understood. The betrayal had infected memory itself. Not just the present, not just the future, the past. Every memory had become unstable. Every happy moment required reevaluation. Every expression of love carried hidden context. Eventually, she said the words I had been dreading. I think we need to live separately. Not forever. Not necessarily. At least that's what she said. But deep down, I think we both knew what it meant. Some distances aren't measured in miles. They're measured in certainty, and the distance between us had become enormous. The practical details happened quickly afterward. I found a small apartment across town. Nothing special. 1 bedroom, a tiny kitchen, a living room barely large enough for a couch. The day I moved out was surreal. 27 years of shared life reduced to boxes. Focus, clothes, photographs, pieces of a marriage being divided into manageable portions. Our children helped. That might have been the hardest part. Watching them carry boxes while pretending not to cry. Watching them navigate a reality neither of them had ever imagined. When everything was packed, I stood in the driveway for a moment. The house looked exactly the same. The lawn, the windows, the porch, nothing visible had changed. Yet everything had. My wife stood in the doorway. Neither of us knew what to say. Finally, I told her I loved her. She cried. I cried. Then she said something that still echoes through my mind. I believe you. And somehow those words hurt even more than goodbye. Because love wasn't the issue. Love remained. Trust didn't. I got into my car, drove away, and for the first time in nearly 3 decades, I no longer had a home waiting for me. Only a future I had created with my own choices, and the realization that some mistakes don't end when they're made. Sometimes they wait 20 years before they finish destroying everything. I am writing this from a small apartment 6 months after the separation. The apartment is clean, quiet, orderly, and it feels nothing like home. The walls are mostly bare except for a few photographs I couldn't bring myself to leave behind. One of my wife and me on our wedding day, one of our children when they were small, one family picture from a vacation years ago. Sometimes I look at those photographs for hours. Not because I'm trying to torture myself, because I'm trying to understand how a person can spend decades building something beautiful and still be the one who destroys it. The strange thing is that my daily life still functions. I go to work. I pay bills. I buy groceries. I answer emails. I make coffee every morning. From the outside, I probably look normal, but grief has a way of existing beneath ordinary routines. Every task feels slightly disconnected from meaning. Every day feels incomplete. The worst moments aren't dramatic. They're small, instinctive. I still reach for my phone when something funny happens. Still think about sending my wife a message. Still see things in stores that I know she'd like. Still hear a story and immediately think I should tell her about this. Then I remember, and the realization hits all over again. The person who occupied the center of my life for nearly 3 decades is no longer part of my everyday world. Not because she stopped loving me, because I gave her a reason to stop trusting me. Those are not the same thing. I understand that now. Our children still speak to me. For that, I am grateful. I don't deserve their kindness, but they've shown it anyway. They're hurt, confused, still processing everything, but they haven't abandoned me. Sometimes we have dinner together. Sometimes they call. Sometimes we talk about normal things. Work, life, relationships. Yet there is always an invisible presence sitting at the table with us. The truth, the thing everyone now knows, the thing nobody can unknow. As for my wife, we still communicate occasionally, mostly practical matters, household issues, financial details, family events. Nothing hostile, nothing cruel. Sometimes that almost makes it harder, because there is no dramatic ending, no screaming, no hatred, no villain, just loss. A few weeks ago, we met for coffee, the first time we'd sat together alone since the separation. She looked tired. I probably did too. We talked politely for a while. Then there was a long silence. Eventually she said something that has stayed with me ever since. I miss the life I thought I had. Not I miss you. Not I want you back. Not I hate you. Just that. I miss the life I thought I had. And I realized that was the true casualty of all this. Not merely our marriage, her reality. For 20 years, she believed she understood the story of her life. Then I handed her information that forced her to rewrite chapters she thought were finished. I sometimes wonder whether people misunderstand guilt. For years I felt guilty, very guilty. But guilt is private. Accountability isn't. Guilt happened in my head. Accountability arrived 20 years later carrying consequences I could no longer avoid. If anyone reading this is expecting me to say I was punished enough by living with the secret, I won't. I wasn't. The punishment was never the guilt. The punishment is this: watching the woman I love question her own memories. Watching my children reevaluate their family history. Sitting alone in an apartment that exists because I chose silence over honesty. The older I get, the more I realize something uncomfortable. You cannot earn forgiveness retroactively. You cannot perform enough good deeds to erase a betrayal. You cannot outrun the past simply by becoming a better person. Growth matters. Change matters. Remorse matters. But they do not cancel consequences. I spent 20 years believing I had moved beyond the worst thing I'd ever done. The truth is that I had merely postponed its impact. Now I'm left with a question I genuinely don't know how to answer. Not as a rhetorical question, not as a plea for sympathy. A real question. For people who have been betrayed. For people who have betrayed someone. For anyone who has lived long enough to understand regret. Can a person ever truly make up for a betrayal if the consequences arrive decades later? Or are there some choices that permanently divide a life into before and after, no matter how much time passes? Because I would give anything to go back 20 years and tell the truth, but I can't. All I can do is live with what I chose, and wonder whether the man who spent 20 years trying to become worthy of his wife arrived too late to matter. This is the end of the story. Don't forget to share with your friends, comment, like, and subscribe.